K-pop and BTS in particular have broken into a mainstream audience in the last year in a way that is unprecedented.
I think a lot of people in the US would describe K-pop as a fad, as something that's not going to last.
미국 음악 전문가들의 미국 내 K-팝에 대한 토론 내용을 요약해 보았습니다. K-팝은 이제 미국 내 주류 음악이 되었다는 긍정적 의견부터 K-팝은 얼마 가지 못할 것이라는 비판적 의견까지 각 분야 전문가들의 솔직하고 다양한 견해를 확인해 보겠습니다.
K-pop and BTS in particular have broken into a mainstream audience in the last year in a way that is unprecedented. You've seen BTS on Jimmy Fallon. They took over Grand Central Station. They were on Carpool Karaoke. They were on Ellen, Today Show. There's all kinds of mainstream audiences that are being exposed to these K-pop groups in a way that is unprecedented. Yeah, so BTS has been number one on the Social 50 chart for Billboard for more than 2 years, and they just broke the record that was previously held by Justin Bieber. And then you can also, of course, look at sales. That's the easiest way to look at it. So BTS, for example, has sold thus far more than 3 million copies of their latest album. I think they actually hit 3 million pre-orders before it even came out. So if that's not success, I don't know what is.
Sure, but there's a big gap between being a phenomenon which is actually impacting all the music around you versus having a little bit of success. So ultimately, they're doing fine, but they certainly are by no means a staple of American culture. I think what that means is that the people that love them, and nobody else is paying any attention.
I think the other part of it has to do with the development of racial discourse and racial histories in the United States. Think about how many Asian American actors are popular, how many Asian American musical acts we have. It's not that they don't exist, but they haven't entered into the mainstream of the United States either. So to ask K-pop to do the thing that even Asian American celebrities and artists and musicians haven't been able to do speaks to something else that's happening in American culture.
Part of it is because they don't really understand the language, and so they don't really know what these artists are singing about. So when it's something that's hard to follow, you don't really give it a chance because you don't really understand it.
It definitely helps when they do sing in English, but that's not something that we really care about. We just want them to be comfortable with whatever language they want to speak in, how they want to do it. Like, we're fine with whatever they want to put out.
It seems really amazing to us now because we see South Korea as this, very developed, very advanced country, which it is. But you go back just 40, 50 years, and Korea was extremely impoverished. They came out of the Korean War devastated. And thanks to a lot of economic policies, South Korea developed extremely rapidly. And one of the main strategies they used was to become an export-oriented economy.
In terms of an export-oriented culture, there are extreme limitations as to what they can actually export because the country's half the size of Florida. It will have to be either manufactured goods in Korea, of which there are few, or it's going to have to be culture.
Yeah, and if you look at the consumer in South Korea, the population is not large enough to sustain the number of K-pop groups that are out there. So the K-pop industry has kind of become export-oriented as well.
I don't think K-pop acts are created with this idea of exporting culture in mind. They're always really, really dedicated to their country. They love the Korean fans. So first and foremost, they're Korean artists.
We might want to mention the importing of the culture. So because of the American military presence in South Korea, they brought American culture with them. This was during the Korean War and in the years afterwards. That's how the culture got in. So then it's mixed and exported out to the globe in terms of K-pop. Once again, it's a hybrid musical form. So it's taking things from this culture and that style of music and this style of music. And I think that that's something that's unique to K-pop. It doesn't sound like other popular musics in East Asia.
The genius of pop music has always been about impurity. It's blending, it's mixing, it's borrowing. And K-pop is kind of where that adventure is at the moment.
Part of what makes K-pop so exciting, especially the boy bands in K-pop, is that they're really blurring the lines between what's considered masculine and feminine. You know, for example, a lot of these K-pop groups are ambassadors for makeup brands. And the fact that they're not ashamed about it or embarrassed about it really speaks to this larger idea of K-pop encouraging people to be who they want to be free to express themselves however they want to dress, however they want to look.
They're not worried about like these rigid standards of masculinity, and they do want to look good on stage, and they don't necessarily need to be worried about wearing makeup just because of some rule about what men should and shouldn't be wearing. But that being said, you do have people coming out and saying really awful things, homophobic things, racist things, and the more exposure to, you know, a broader audience and the more success, you're going to get some of those comments as well.
K-pop is definitely structured differently. There's a lot of highs and lows, louds and softs. It doesn't follow a traditional verse, chorus, bridge, chorus formula. A lot of times it weaves in and out between a rap verse and a melodic verse. A lot of times the beat will drop differently. That's why I think you can't chalk it up to being kind of like generic cookie cutter pop.
What that means is musically, it doesn't sound like other records that are on the air today. It's not made by producers that are on the air today. And many of the K-pop records are intentionally made muddy. So you don't hear the separation of tracks. You don't hear the soaring melody lines. They don't stack vocals in the same way. It just sounds like a vocal. You're not getting those opportunities to actually see what an individual can do. You're meant to experience them as a group. You have to think about culturally how K-pop is engineered. K-pop is a creation, okay? The boys, men, males, females, people who are chosen for very specific reasons. They are trained, they are characters, they are taught to behave a certain way, which embraces the theme of that particular group.
I think we have to be really careful about how we talk about these stars. There is a tendency in the Western media to say things like they're coming off of an assembly line, the K-pop factory. And I have a really big problem with terms like that because I think those terms are very dehumanizing. And so I think that that's one thing that I would like to see change a little bit in the discourse of how we talk about K-pop.
In the U.S. market, there's about 2 million Korean Americans or people of Korean descent. Without question, BTS or large K-pop groups are going to be able to sell tickets in New York City and certainly sell out Madison Square Garden, and can do well probably in the top 10 Korean American markets in the US. But beyond that, they can't.
Actually challenge the notion that BTS's success depends on Asian Americans. I know for a fact that one of the things we know about K-pop fandom is that it's incredibly diverse. In fact, in my data, I constantly see very, very few Asian American respondents and more Latino, African American, and white respondents in the United States. So that's actually a myth. It's very interesting coming from an American point of view because we're used to being the center. We're used to everybody aspiring to be like us. From an economic point of view, K-pop does not need the United States.
I think the American music audience is getting less xenophobic over time. We're seeing that barrier broken down, and we're seeing some really amazing artists breaking in a way that we haven't seen before.
오늘 영상은 여기까지입니다. 구독, 좋아요, 알림 설정으로 응원해주세요.